Hello, Yes fans. My name is Sean McKee, and I'm a friend of and musical collaborator with Jon Anderson. I wanted to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Yes, and thought it would be interesting to ask some notable musicians what their thoughts were. So between myself and Billy James from Glass Onion PR, we asked a bunch of musicians one question. What did you think or feel the first time you heard or saw Yes? And here's what they had to say.
Hey folks, Steve Vai here, and I want to say congratulations to Yes, 50 years making music, and wow, that's big. And I was a teenager in the 70s, and I immediately gravitated to progressive rock. And a friend of mine, John Sergio, turned me on to all this great progressive rock during that period. There was Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Jethro Tull, but when I heard Yes, it was definitely something that, you know, shook my tree. Having your music as a teenager is like one of the things that you can look back on and feel a deep warmth in. Just when you discovered the love you had for music because of music like that. And just the melodic nature of the band, I was always enjoyed the time signature changes that they did, and just the progressive aspect of it was sincere and authentic. And I remember going to see them play at Madison Square Garden or Nassau Coliseum whenever they were in town, and being 17 and being exposed to that was so cool, so cool. I'm so grateful to have had you guys in my life when I was a teenager. Thank you. Great stuff. Congratulations.
So I'm in New York. I'm sitting having dinner with my then manager Peter Mensch, and the tables were so squashed together, and Jon Anderson sitting right next to us, and he's with his tour guide or something, and it was so close that the conversation started. I'd never met him before, so it just kind of joined into this big conversation. We sat there for like hours talking about music business stuff and Yes and Def Leppard and all sorts of stuff. So that was interesting. But the first time I heard Yes, I think it was Roundabout. And the clap, because you know I was a real electric guitar fan. The first time I had a guitar, an acoustic guitar that I could relate to on that level, so that was pretty cool.
I like the music of Yes from the very first time I discovered their music. I thought they were revolutionary, and what I really liked, coming myself from a classical background, that they were somehow doing modern music, sort of an evolution of classical music, playing long stretches, going into different moods, when at the time, you know, the trend was to do just very short 3-minute songs. So that's how I really appreciated the music of Yes.
I want to send a big and a heartfelt congratulations to the band, to all its members, past and present, for 50 years now, 50 years of inspiration, to musicians like myself who've learned partly from Yes that it's very worthwhile to do things not by the book, not the way other bands have done them, and for 50 years of thrills for audiences and listeners like myself who've been excited and thrilled by the quality of Yes's music and the originality of it. So here's to Yes, 50 years of Yes, and I'm looking forward to the next 50 years.
Hi, this is Roine Stolt. I'm speaking from Sweden. I'm here to celebrate 50 years of Yes music. I first came upon Yes, I think, when I was back in school, and there was a friend who brought an album, I think maybe 1972. I was a bass player at the time, so I was sort of taken in by the fantastic bass lines and the sound that Chris Squire had at the time. And being at the time probably more into blues rock and that kind of music and the Allman Brothers, all that stuff, I was suddenly drawn into Yes. And I remember getting the live triple album, getting Topographic Oceans, I think, and that was sort of sealed the deal. I was a total Yes head at the time, and all the great musicianship from all the members, the writing, the the grand adventure that Yes music was at the time. So I've been following the band since then. Sometimes more involved in the albums and the music, and sometimes going in and out. And a couple of years back, I got the offer to actually work with one of the members, Jon Anderson, for an album. And that was, as you can imagine, great thing, you know. And even being on stage and playing the first side of Topographic Oceans, that was kind of a surreal moment for me. So anyway, I'm here to celebrate 50 years of Yes music, like the rest of you, and I hope there will be many more years. Bye-bye.
Hello, gentlemen. This is Jeff Berlin. Happy anniversary. It's an amazing milestone that you guys have reached, 50 years in music. It's hard to find a bigger fan of you guys than I. You guys have been a great influence on me. I've listened to your music for years. You are amongst the greatest innovators in rock music. And I'm also, I guess, a card-carrying member of the Yes fraternity. I might have had the shortest time in that fraternity, but I was on stage with you guys playing and watching you guys ply your trade. It's one of the great memories for me, and really one of the most exciting musical events that I have had. So I send you my respect, I send you my love. Happy 50th anniversary, and many, many more from your biggest fan, Jeff Berlin.
So I grew up in New York on Long Island, and it was one of these rock and roll areas of the country where Yes was actually played on the radio. So I remember hearing Roundabout and just being like, what the hell? You know, it just stuck out from all the other music that was on the radio. And of course, went out and got Fragile and just got totally blown away. Have never been the same since. But I have a funny Yes story. We toured with Yes. We were fortunate enough to open and tour with Yes. And one morning on the tour, I went down to have breakfast at the hotels with my wife. And I look over and I see Rick Wakeman sitting there. And I'm like, oh, let me just go up to him and talk to him and introduce myself. And I'm talking to him, we're chatting for a while and everything. And I go, yeah, so, you know, at the end of the conversation, have a great show tonight. And he's like, yeah, where are you playing? So he didn't realize that I was on the tour with them, and that was a very great, humbling, and hysterical moment. And that's my Yes story.
Well, you know, I guess I heard my first Yes records like 1975 or something like that. I was in junior high school, and we heard, you know, Fragile, Yes songs. I think Roundabout was probably the first one I heard, which is probably a very common answer. But I'll just never forget the keyboards. You know, it was, you know, a lot of rock and roll bands and keyboards just weren't that prominent. And there was the Doors, of course. But other than that, you know, when you listen to the Stones and everything, it's kind of laid back in the mix. So I was just taken with Rick Wakeman, you know, and of course Jon Anderson's voice is just angelic. I don't know another word for it. It just takes over the sound. And I remember the bass sound had this like real kind of rickety, trebly kind of sound, but it was so prominent and high in the mix. I love the bass lines. But I think a lick I play all the time is I think it's off Roundabout, kind of in the bridge before it goes to that killer solo, organ solo that Rick Wakeman does. But you know, I'd say about 5 times a night I end up doing this, like in a Space Jam or something. I do that probably 5-10 times a night, you know. And then I was like, that's from Roundabout, yeah, before he gets that organ solo when it kind of comes down. And so there's probably 100 Yes licks I do throughout the course of an evening. And, you know, Rick Wakeman is just one of the heroes of keyboard playing. Then I saw them in New York City growing up. I think it was a Palladium on 14th Street. but I'll just never forget it. You know, I'd never heard anything like Yes. It's just it was just amazing. And Yes's music, Mikey Hauser, our founding member, always used to talk about how much he loved Yes, and we always used to sit in the back lounge of the bus and talk about how Yes was our favorite band, you know, way back in the day.
So, I very, very clearly recall the first time I heard Yes, which was when I was 8 years old. And there was a record store that was just about a mile and a half from our house. It was called Soundsville. It was 1970. Or I guess it must be 71. Because I walked into the store and they were playing this music that just sounded like, and I'd never had this experience before, just purely from sound. I had it from visuals when I was 6 or 7 and saw 2001: A Space Odyssey in a large CinemaScope theater and thought that I was literally out of this world. But this was the first time that sound had given me that same feeling. It was when I walked into Soundsville and I heard this music, and I had no idea what it was. But at that point I was obsessed with the Beatles, and there was something about the vocal blend that touched me in the same way that the Beatles vocal blend did. But there was so much more happening musically that I had never encountered in a single song before, and it blew my mind. And I was already playing the organ, so the fact that there was prominent organ in the mix also had a big impact. So I was immediately flabbergasted and immediately needing to know more. I was 8 years old, and the scariest thing when you're a kid is to talk to the guy behind the counter at the record store, because they always know more than you and are very happy to let you know that fact. So I with great hesitancy, I slowly made my way to the counter and I said, "Excuse me, what's the name of this album?" And he said, "It's called the Yes album," with some annoyance. And I said, "What's the name of the band?" And he looked at me like I was an idiot and said, "Yes!" Like I should have known this. And then he showed me the album cover, and I thought that the album cover was haunting with the little mannequin head and everything, and it seemed to be like a window into another world. But I fell in love with that music instantly, and it turned out it was Yours Is No Disgrace that I was hearing, and it just made a huge impact on me. And then a few months later, when I heard Roundabout on the radio, and I realized that they had made an incursion into alien territory, into the above ground, and that people all everywhere I went, people were listening to this music, and it was it was a mainstream hit and everything. And so the idea that music like this could actually communicate with large numbers of people was a very important thing to me. And then as I got a little older, started collecting the albums, and then the first tour that I saw was the Relayer tour. And that is something that I'm very, very grateful that I had a chance to experience that live. And I experienced every moment of it with every one of my senses as wide open as possible. I wanted to just like become one with that concert. It was so unbelievable to me. And my other abiding memory of that concert was a dude sitting next to me who was getting high the whole time, and apparently too high, because when the show was done, he said, "What? It's not over yet, is it?" And it had already been like a 2.5-hour concert, which meant they played like 6 songs. And I said, "No, it's done." And he's like, "But they only played like 20 minutes." I said, "No, it was about," I looked at my watch, it was like a 2.5-hour show. I said, "No, man, it was 20 minutes. So I became, firmly anti-drug for a while as a result of that interaction. But it's, I've had so many fantastic experiences in my life that Yes were the soundtrack for, and I'm very grateful that they exist and that they have existed. And there's nothing else like their music. It's just a little, it's heaven, it's heaven on earth.
Discovering Yes was a life-changing experience for me. At the time, it was early 1971. I was working at a radio station in Miami, and we got hundreds of albums in every week, and I'd go through them and just look at them. I remember seeing the Yes album, didn't pay much attention to it. And, just went home one Sunday evening, and all the FM stations were playing public service, public affairs material, public service. And so I tuned on this guy named China Vallis on an AM station that had an underground show on Sunday nights. And I must have caught it right at the beginning because it was Starship Trooper, and I'd never, ever heard anything like it. I was actually kind of depressed at the time, living alone, and the station wasn't on the air yet. I'd broken up with my girlfriend, and this took me to a completely different level. I could not believe what I was hearing. And then the disillusion part comes in, and I thought, oh no, they changed songs. It's a country song now. And then realized quickly that no, this is a suite. And as the song progressed, it just got more engrossing. And through the worm, the ending portion, I was just mesmerized. I'd never heard anything even close to this. And then afterwards, he says that's a band called Yes from the Yes album and Starship Trooper. And this was late at night. This was probably 11:30 or even midnight. I actually went back down to the radio station, which was an hour drive, to get the Yes album, to bring it home and listen to it. And I remember putting on Yours Is No Disgrace and thinking, I'm not ready for this yet. So I kept living with Starship Trooper, and I've Seen All Good People, and then Perpetual Change and Adventure, and of course The Clap. And then I finally got to Yours Is No Disgrace, so it was very evolutionary for me. It was so advanced, so progressive, so cinematic. It was like you close your eyes and a movie unfolds in front of you. And nothing had even come close to doing that to me since the Beatles. And I will say, obviously due respect to the Beatles, this did it more. This had more of a cinematic, cerebral effect on me. And then later that year, they began their American tour. And there was a Atlantic Records promotion guy, his name, I still remember his name, Peter Nashik. And he said, he knew I was into Yes heavily, and he said, they are going to be playing up at Rollins College near Daytona Beach. Do you want to come up with me? I said, hell yes. So we grabbed the smallest plane I'd been in at the time and flew up to Daytona Beach and met Yes at the airport. Picked him up, took him to the hotel, hung out with him, actually loaned Jon Anderson a $1 bill, which he says he still remembers but hasn't paid me back yet for. And then that night saw the gig. It was outdoor, and again, blown away. I'd never seen anything like it. It was kind of unusual because they were playing cuts from Fragile, and Fragile hadn't been released in America yet. But the whole vibe of the place was just electric with this new kind of energy. And then that was 2 days, maybe 3 days before Thanksgiving of '71. And then in December of '71, I was by this time reading Melody Maker every week so I could find out what the latest from Yes was, Melody Maker being the British music trade at the time. And I remember seeing an ad that Fragile, coming out soon, available now by mail order. So I called them and finagled a way to pay him, and I received Fragile before anybody else. And when I heard Fragile, and this was, I guess, it was right after Christmas of 1970, I think it was right after Christmas, or wintertime of 1971-72. That again blew my mind to the next level. And ever since then, they have continued to evolve as just this mind-blowing experience that was a life changer for me.